Is there a vision in the Bible for rescuing people who are helpless? Is there a vision in the Bible for giving new life to the poor? Is there a vision in the Bible for taking people whose dignity has been trampled, degraded, and raising them up? The answer is yes. That vision is nowhere on greater display than in the book of Ruth. And we come this morning to the heart of that vision of how God would rescue the poor and the vulnerable. And as we return to this story, we come to the core of the problem for these two widows that we have been following, one an Israelite, Naomi, and her daughter-in-law, the Moabite, Ruth. And as we've followed them, the first problem that we've been wrestling with is, how can an enemy of Israel come into Israel and live there and be received there? How can this really happen? And we've already seen that there is a solution to this. Boaz, a godly man, learned in the law of God, has built a whole operation in his farm and in his business that ministers to the poor and to the foreigners. And so he knows who Ruth is, and he has sought out her situation, and he understands her vulnerability, and he raises her up. And he does it according to the law in Leviticus 19, as we saw. He opens up his field for the poor and the foreigner to come in and glean and to receive food and build up food for their homes for the next year, so that literally the entire community, from the richest to the poorest, is doing the same work and participating in the harvest. One of the things we learn from this story about God's vision for rescuing the poor and the vulnerable is the power and dignity of work. And this story is about how it's a vision of how Israel might have been if more men had been like Boaz. The vision of the Bible is not, there are poor peoples that will give them money and then walk away. The vision of the Bible is, this is a poor person, a vulnerable person, but this person has something to contribute. This person has value to add to the community. And so we're going to make a way for this person and these people in these conditions to add value to the community through work. This is a vision that, to say the least, we do not share today. The value and importance of work and labor, in particular, labor with our hands. That value has really been degraded over the last number of decades in our society. And the value and dignity of labor and the dignity of being a contributor to the community has really been thrown aside in favor of another kind of vision of the poor, that is, that some people are just helpless victims. And this vision that we have adopted in our society tends to treat people as if they have nothing to contribute. They only have need. In the Bible's vision of raising up the poor have value, and they have something to add. And so the vision of the law of God is to create a society in which all of the people with all of their property are creating ways for those who are more vulnerable to add value to the community. It's a very important piece of this vision. So we saw that at work in the story of Ruth. She can work in Boaz's field, and even as a Moabite, Boaz is saying, you have exhibited character that is extremely important. You have shown your Israelite mother-in-law faithful friendship. You have labored to add value to her life. You have followed the God of Israel. You have sought shelter under his wings. And so we honor that. We, all of us here in Bethlehem, we see your character and we honor it, we uphold it. You are one of us. Now, the importance of this is just so hard to overstate. And it goes straight to the dignity of someone like Ruth, who is an alien to that place and someone who is vulnerable at the same time. But this doesn't solve the whole problem. The problem goes deeper for Ruth and for Naomi. Do they have a future, or is their life a kind of living death? Because in this culture of Israel and in ancient cultures broadly, to have no children is to have no life, to have no future, to have nothing that will perpetuate your family and your family's property and your family's place in the community. All of that dies if you have no children. And so the vulnerability here of Ruth in this society is a very deep one. And it is shared by her mother-in-law, Naomi. They have no future because they have no husbands and they will not have any children. And that future is a future of death. It's hard for us to conceive of this, and because in our society, the future means the future for me, my future. That's how we think about the future. What am I going to be doing in 10 years? How am I going to be fulfilled in the coming years of my life? And I think one of the things that Ruth confronts us with is that at no time in human history, in no culture on the face of the earth, has the future ever been regarded so narrowly and selfishly as in the United States. So the orientation toward the future is, I am connected to those who come after me. I am bound to them. I am bound to those who came before me. I am their future, and my children, my grandchildren, and their children are my future. That's the way the future is conceived of in biblical terms. And it's just impossible to overstate how alien this is. So literally, the question in Ruth is, are Naomi and Ruth going to endure a living death? Is that their future? And so, as we saw last week during our wonderful family service, Naomi says to Ruth, there's a redeemer. His name is Boaz. And you can go to him, and he can redeem you, and he can redeem me by marrying you. And so there is to be an exchange of money here. And so Ruth has gone to the threshing floor in the dead of night, and she has uncovered Boaz's feet and laid down at his feet. And when he awoke, she asked him, will you redeem me? Will you cover me with your wings? things protectively, like the Lord is doing for me by your own admission. And Boaz is promised, yes, I will do that. And I want you to notice how he says this. In chapter 3 of Ruth, verse 11, "And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all of my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman." Now, that word "worthy," it has come up before in Ruth. Boaz himself was described as worthy, and when we came to that part in chapter 2, I told you, it summons up the old-fashioned black and white studio pictures of people in starched collars and looking all very serious, like worthy citizens. That is not the picture here. The word "worthy" means strong, valiant. Don't cross this person. That's what the word "worthy" means. So when it says Boaz is worthy, it means he's a tough guy. He's got thick skin, and he's physically strong, and he knows how to fight for what he needs. And so that was the sense of that word back in Ruth chapter 2. So here we have Boaz saying to Ruth, everyone in town knows that you are valiant, strong, worthy. You're a fighter. You're tough. You can work. You can get it done. And you fight for those you love. So that's what he says to her. He says, don't be afraid. I will do what you are asking me to do because everyone knows that you are one of the valiant people. And so he says, there is a nearer kinsman. I am indeed a kinsman of Elimelech, your dead father-in-law, but there's a nearer kinsman, and he has first right of refusal here. So he says, tomorrow I'm going to take care of this. If he will redeem you, then he will do that. But if he says no, then I will do it. And that brings us to Ruth 4, 1 through 4. Now, for the first time in this story, we leave the perspective of women, Naomi and Ruth. Everything in the story has been narrated from their point of view. And finally, at this moment, we enter what we would say, and what they would say is, the man's world. And they are not there. And they are not part of this discussion. And this whole thing is very strange to us because what needs to happen is a payment needs to be made so that the value of Elimelech's land can pay for Naomi and Ruth to have a life. But there's more than that. Naomi and Ruth need a future. They need children. They need a husband. Because they are connected to those who follow after them. And if there is no one to follow after them, their family dies. So money is going to come in and redeem this situation through the hand of somebody, either Boaz or this other redeemer. So we're at the city gate, and Boaz is sitting there, and the guy who is the nearer kinsman, this is a closer family relation than Boaz is to Elimelech, that nearer kinsman comes walking up. Boaz jumps up and says, friend, stop here a minute, sit down. You elders, I'm going to get 10 of you. We're going to all sit down here. We're going to do some business. Money's going to change hands here. And so he sits down and explains the situation to the Redeemer. Notice the Redeemer has no name. It's just kind of a walk-on character. His only role is to say, no, I can't do that, and then he leaves. Exit stage left. So he doesn't get a name in this story, satirical or otherwise. He's just the Redeemer, the kinsman. So he said, Boaz, to the Redeemer, verse 3, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it. Fish or cut bait. You're the Redeemer. There's no one besides you. I come after you. So it's you or it's me. So buy it or don't buy it. Notice the only proposition at this point is land. So the kinsman says, I will redeem it. Yeah, I'll buy that land. And so we've got a step towards redemption. Money is going to change hands, and that land is going to supply the needs of Naomi and Ruth because they are going to receive a price for that land. Fun fact, any purchase of land in Israel under the law of God is a lease, not a purchase. It's a lease that lasts all of the time up through 50 years. When the year of Jubilee, the 50th year comes along, every land purchase reverts to the original owner. All leases are off, and every clan receives back the land it originally had in Israel. So, if you're going to buy a piece of land, you'd better be able to get the profit out of it that you have invested in it, because the lease is up in 50 years. Another fact, not so fun, Israel never did it. Not once. It never honored the Sabbath years. Every 7 years, land to lie fallow, slaves freed from their obligations. Every 7th year, never did it. Not once. Not under the judges, not under David, not under any of the reforming kings. Never. And that is why Israel went into exile. But that's a whole other story. So that's the proposition on the table here. Are you going to redeem the land? And the guy says, yes. And at this point, we all have a sharp intake of breath. That means that Boaz cannot marry Ruth. And that's the only thing we've been wanting for the last 8 weeks, is for Boaz to marry Ruth. Pastor, will you hurry up and get to the wedding part? And, now it looks like the wedding is off. What is going to happen? Well, last week somebody asked me by text during the family service, was Boaz already thinking about this? We have some indication back in chapter 3 when he calls Ruth valiant. We have some indication that he has a particular regard for her. And so I think that is one indication that he was indeed considering this and how he might marry her in this whole process. But the clincher is the way he handles this next move. He dangles the land in front of the guy, and the guy says, yeah, I'll buy the land. And then he basically says, oh, almost forgot, there's a wife with the land. Ruth, the Moabite. Clever psychology. He has thought this through. He's a couple moves ahead here. And he's saying, if you buy that land, and in fact, here's how he puts it. Verse 5, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. A couple of things that might be going on here. One of them might be that the law really isn't in force, and it's only in force if somebody puts it in force. And so maybe this guy wants to buy the land without the wife. So he wants to be the redeemer, sort of, but he doesn't want the responsibility for the other part. the family part, rescuing these two widows from a living death. So it's entirely possible that Boaz is dangling the land in front of this guy and saying, then, if you're going to do that, you acquire the wife, and I'm saying so. It could be that simple. Here we are in front of the elders. Maybe nobody else sees it this way, but my friend, I see it this way, and if you want to cross me, you're free to do that. So it might be that kind of thing, but in any case, the minute he brings up the wife, the deal's off. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it, the land, for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Now, commentators, nobody's quite sure how doing this would impair his own inheritance, because basically it ain't his. It's Naomi's land. So there's never any dispute about who inherits. Once you have Naomi's land and you wed Naomi's daughter-in-law, then the son from that union inherits that land. That's the whole point. Maybe this guy is trying to finesse this a little bit, get the land in his own inheritance without having to then hand off that same land to his son. So whatever it is that he's saying here, he's basically saying, yeah, this isn't penciling for me, so I'm out. And he says, take my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. So once there's a wife at stake, the redemption is not going to go forward. So just an observation about this. What is God's vision for raising up people who are vulnerable and restoring them, redeeming them? We've talked about work. That is clearly part of the restoration, that people become contributors to the community and producers. And so that's one part of it. But another part of it is security and love and a place, an inheritance, a future. And that's marriage. And so we're dealing with a passage here that seems, I don't know, to us, pretty not very romantic. Let's put it that way. And in fact, as you know, Boaz is going to say, I bought myself a wife. And okay, so that's not PC. We don't say that today because we are, okay, we are in a fantasy world about marriage. Marriage always has been about partnership in work. It has always been about building a life together that not just pays for itself, but adds value to the community. Marriage is not private. Marriage is public. And always has been. Now, obviously, aspects of marriage are private, and no one else shares in that. But marriage itself, as an institution, is called an institution because it is foundational for people's life together in society. It is a public institution. And as a public thing, in order to enter into a marriage, the qualification is not that you feel very strongly. The qualification is not that you feel very strongly for a long time. That you be devoted to the person you are marrying. The qualification is this: I will step up and go on the record and take up my responsibilities to this person. Now, we still do that. If you want to get married, you still have to go get a license. And you have to sign that thing, and somebody has to witness it. It's a lot the same as what is about to happen here. But we just ignore that part. Like, well, that's just the formality. It's just a piece of paper. Is it? You want to take the intimacy, you want to take the love, you want to take the favor, but you don't want to step up and take the responsibilities to care for that person. I want it to register with us how deep a shame it is to commit something like that. And I want it to register with us, not so that we can feel bad or we can shame people or any of those things. I want it to register with us because we need to see that this is about real care, making promises, taking vows, and keeping those promises. Think about what all depends on this institution. How vulnerable are children? They're the most vulnerable people in society. Marriage is us saying, we are going to care for the most vulnerable people, emotionally, economically, physically. We're going to care for them. And we're going to go on the record. We're going to say, I'm in and I am signing for this. We're in a fantasy world that marriage is this private thing, this private sort of erotic fantasy that you have access to this person and you can take from this person. And as long as that person makes you happy, then the thing keeps going. But, if it's just not working out, why then, we'll move on. And we have been living this way. And it is not for nothing that we're seeing the poverty rate of children and the poverty rate of women off the charts. There's a direct relationship between those two things. Because when you devalue this institution, you are basically saying, we're going to take from you and we're not going to care for you. You're on your own. You're big, you're strong, you can take care of yourself. And so this move that we have made is not just callous about sexuality. It's actually dehumanizing. It's actually saying to people, you are only valuable to me if I continue to be attracted to you sexually, or if I continue to get along with you. And so basically, we've made a move in our society that undoes God's vision for caring for the vulnerable. And because we've done this, we are reaping the consequences of that. There are more and more vulnerable who are not cared for, and we don't have the means to care for them. So this is something of what's at stake here, and I don't know, we look at this wedding ring from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and we think, well, what happened to that marriage? It's sometime in the 1800s, this wedding band was put on one person's ring finger. And I think probably what happened there is the person died and they had to cut the ring off. That's good. What an awesome thing, fidelity. And we need to sing its praises because fidelity cares for people. And you say, yeah, but what about the emotional quality of the relationship, how authentic it was, and were they happy? And, well, Okay, you got your authenticity. How happy are you? Let's go. Rates of anxiety, loneliness, depression, suicide, off the charts. How happy are you with all this authenticity? Maybe we need care. And care assumes fidelity. So what's happening here is you have two vulnerable widows, and the Lord is caring for them, and as he cares for them, he is using Boaz. So here's how this goes down. A right to buy this land and take this wife, that right has been refused. So verse 7, now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging to confirm a transaction. The one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. This is one of the things that tells you the book of Ruth was written hundreds of years after this event, because this custom is no longer practiced when Ruth is written, so they have to explain it. But basically what he's saying is, this guy went on the record. He took his sandal off, handed it to Boaz, and said, "My right is now yours." And I will just tell you that I am very glad this is no longer the custom for attesting things. This custom is weird. It looks strange to us, but think about how strange it is that in a few hundred years from now, somebody is going to describe the manner of attesting transactions in America in the 21st century, and they're going to say there was a screen, and there was a line on the screen, and in order to attest the transaction, someone took their finger and went and pushed done. And that was it. How strange is that? Well, it's just another custom for attesting to things, saying, I'm on the record. I'm stepping up to my responsibilities for this. So Boaz now has the right. What does he do with it? He takes a vow. And so the next thing that's weird about this story is we want to get to the wedding. Why don't they show the wedding where, they play music and the bride walks down and she's dressed in a fancy dress and everybody cries? Why don't we get to that part? Here we're still at the city gate. Ruth isn't even there. Here's the essence of what happens. Verse 9. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon, and also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day." What is Boaz doing here in the context of the days of the judges when the law really isn't in force? And no one's really going to require this. In fact, there's a redeemer kind of waiting around to take the land, but not the wife. What is he doing? He's saying, brothers, it works like this. I'm stepping up to my responsibilities, and I'm going on the record. I am the redeemer for this situation, and this family will have a future, and I will guarantee this. It's amazing. It's so countercultural. And it reminds me that when we do get to the ceremonies where they play the music and the bride walks down and everybody cries, it's not about the couple and how deeply they feel. That's there. That's a reality. But this is a a formal exchange of vows where that couple is going on the record. I'm with you. I belong to you. And you belong to me. And we will care for each other. And you all are witnesses. You heard those vows. And the community is part of this. Even though much of this is private, the community is part of it. And we together are going to be producers in this community with all of you, not takers. So that's the sense of what happens here. And the proof of it is the blessings that the people around Boaz give. When he takes this vow and he's holding the sandal there, then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, "We are witnesses. We heard you. We heard your vow." And then they bless this marriage. I want you to take this in, because this is telling us that the whole community of Bethlehem bought in to Boaz's vision. We're going to bring a Moabite right into our very hearts. And we're going to do it because God's law doesn't recognize Moabite or Israelite. It only recognizes the character of God toward his people. And here is a valiant woman standing up and fighting for the life of her mother-in-law, even though she's from a different nation. And these people in Bethlehem buy into this. We are witnesses. May Yahweh make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. What are they saying? May your household found something new. May you be the start of something different. They give another blessing. May you act worthily, there's our word again, valiantly. May you act with strength and courage in Ephrathah, another name for this region, and be renowned. May you have a name in Bethlehem, Boaz. And so the connection here is redeeming is an act of strength and valor. So may you continue to act with this redemptive spirit in our community. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give to you by this young woman. Why on earth are they bringing up one of the most shameful stories in the whole Bible? A story of betrayal, a story of just, there's no other way to say it, illicit sexual intercourse, a story of illegitimacy, a story of death. Why are they bringing that up as a blessing? Oh, we're out of time. I'll tell you all about this next week, because there is a plan here. There is a meaning to this blessing. But the blessing is we're in too. We want this, you marrying Ruth, the Moabite, to be the beginning of something new, something long, something of renown. We've seen a picture of gold coins from the ancient world. We've seen a wedding ring, another kind of purchase price. Let's talk about the gospel and the purchase price of our Redeemer. All of this is being told to us because it is helping us understand what the gospel is. Does God have a vision for saving the poor and the vulnerable? We've been talking about it economically, and socially. And we've seen something of the Lord's vision through the law and the way that he wanted this to work, and he wanted care to be given. We've seen that this care was to be given to the poor to raise them up with dignity, to raise them up with a sense of their value before God. And so, why are we being told this? Because there's a biblical pattern around the word redemption. The pattern shows up every time the word shows up, and it is very present and dramatic in the book of Ruth. Redemption is about rescue. Rescue from death, a living death, like Naomi and Ruth. I want you to think about and pray about your impoverished and deeply vulnerable soul. The part of us where we live, but it might be a living death, because there is no future, and because you know your soul is carrying sin that cannot be paid off. And that sin is wired into you. It's part of you. It's part of your identity. You can't get rid of it because you're bankrupt and you have no resources to hit delete on the hard drive of your soul. It's not there. Those sins are going to remain there. Ruth is being given to us, is being told to us so that we can understand what Jesus does to rescue the sin-sick soul. He pays. We celebrated it. My body is broken for you. This is my blood, the new covenant in my blood, which was given for you. It's payment. It's also about restoration. As a sinner, you have value. You are worthy before God because you are made in His image. Now the sin has marred that image. It has degraded your dignity. And it has made you something that God never created you to be. But as your soul is rescued from that sin because the payment clears your debts, your dignity is restored. You have a place. You are born again, new identity. You belong in the body of Christ. You are part of Christ. And He is your Redeemer, your kinsman, the one who married His bride, the church, in order to give her security. So the wealth of Boaz is now security for Ruth and Naomi against all the storms of life and all of the threats of the future. And his dignity is now extended to them. That's Jesus for us. His wealth, the wealth of his inheritance, the greatness of his power, the abundance of his grace is our security in a fallen world. It is our security against death. It is eternal life. The book of Ruth is the gospel before Jesus.